There is a particular kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with how much you have worked or how little you have slept. It is the exhaustion of perpetual effort against reality. The exhaustion of a life spent pushing, managing, forcing, controlling, arranging, trying to make things be other than they are. You recognize it not as tiredness, but as a kind of grinding tension that never fully releases, a background strain that persists, even in moments of rest, even in moments that should be peaceful, even in moments when, by any external measure, things are going well. That tension is the signature of a life lived in opposition to its own nature. And Alan Watts spent his entire life pointing to what that tension actually is, and why almost every human being carries it without ever questioning whether it is necessary. The tension comes from the belief that you are separate from life, and therefore must manage it, that you stand at some distance from the current of existence and must work constantly to direct it toward outcomes you have decided are good and away from outcomes you have decided are bad. That without your intervention, without your effort and your planning and your vigilance and your control, things will go wrong. This belief is so fundamental, so universally shared, so woven into the fabric of how Western civilization in particular understands what it means to be a responsible adult, that questioning, it seems, not just counterintuitive, but irresponsible. Of course, you must manage your life. Of course, you must work hard and plan carefully and exercise discipline. What kind of advice is it to suggest otherwise? But Watts was not suggesting otherwise. This is the misunderstanding that follows his teaching wherever it goes. He was not advising passivity. He was not recommending that you stop caring about outcomes or abandon all effort or drift through life in a state of pleasurable indifference. He was pointing to something far more subtle and far more radical than any of that. He was pointing to the difference between action that arises from understanding and action that arises from the neurotic compulsion of a self that believes itself fundamentally separate from the world it inhabits. One of these produces what the ancient Chinese called Wu Wei. The other produces what most people simply call their life. Wu Wei is almost always translated as non-action or non-doing, and almost always this translation creates the wrong impression immediately. Because Wu Wei is not the absence of action. It is action without the friction of self-consciousness, action without the layer of commentary and management, and second-guessing and effortful steering that the ego imposes on every movement. It is what happens when the person who is doing the thing gets out of the way of the thing being done, not through self-erasure or mystical dissolution, but through the recognition of something. Watts considered the most important and most consistently overlooked fact about human existence, that you are not separate from the universe you inhabit. You are what the universe is doing, right here, right now, in exactly this form. When a tree grows, it does not deliberate about the direction of growth. When a river finds its way to the sea, it does not plan its route through an act of conscious discipline. When your heart beats, it does not consult your will. When your lungs breathe, they do not wait for your permission. The vast majority of what your body does, it does with a competence and an intelligence that your conscious mind could not replicate if it tried for 1,000 years. The immune system fights off threats your consciousness never becomes aware of. The digestive system manages a complexity of chemical processes that would occupy an army of biochemists to merely describe. The brain integrates sensory information from millions of sources simultaneously, producing a seamless experience of a coherent world, and does all of this so efficiently and so automatically that the conscious mind takes credit for the outcome without any awareness of the staggering process that produced it. Watts asked a question that, once genuinely heard, does not stop reverberating. He asked, if you cannot trust yourself to manage your own heartbeat, what makes you think you are qualified to manage your life? Not as a rhetorical dismissal of human intelligence or capability, but as a genuine invitation to consider what the you is that believes itself to be in charge. The conscious mind, the part that plans and worries and makes decisions and tells stories about itself and its future, is not the totality of what you are. It is not even the most important part of what you are. It is a late evolutionary addition to a system of extraordinary sophistication that operated perfectly well in countless forms for billions of years before anything resembling human self-consciousness appeared in the universe. And this late addition, this narrator, this planner, this word has convinced itself that it is the driver rather than a passenger who has mistaken the front seat for the steering wheel. The consequences of this mistaken identity are everywhere in ordinary life. You meet someone for the first time and you want them to like you. Immediately the self-consciousness activates. You begin to monitor how you are coming across. You notice your words as you speak them and evaluate whether they are making the right impression. You become aware of your body and whether it is positioned correctly and whether your face is communicating the right things. And in this flood of self-monitoring, something happens that you have probably noticed without ever fully understanding. You become less charming, less present, less genuinely interesting, less yourself. The very effort to appear a certain way undermines the appearance. The very trying to be natural produces the very reaching for connection creates distance. This is not a social problem. It is a demonstration of something structural about the relationship between conscious effort and spontaneous excellence. Watts drew on the Zen tradition repeatedly to illustrate this. And the Zen tradition is full of stories that point to the same recognition from different angles. The master archer does not think about releasing the arrow. The master calligrapher does not think about the brushstroke. The master musician does not think about the next note. At the highest levels of any discipline, the practitioner disappears into the doing, and what remains is pure action without the interference of a self that is watching itself act and making adjustments and monitoring outcomes. The decades of practice that precede this state are not practice in the ordinary sense. They are the gradual dissolution of the interference of self-consciousness in the activity being practiced, and what Watts recognized is that life itself, the whole of it, not just artistic practice or athletic performance, but the entire movement of your existence through time is capable of this quality, not as an achievement to be reached through sufficient practice, but as the natural state of a being that has stopped fighting against its own nature, because fighting against your own nature is the only real effort you are making. Everything else is relatively easy. The difficulty of life, the grinding, exhausting, spirit-wearing difficulty of ordinary human existence is almost entirely the difficulty of being in perpetual resistance to what is. The Taoists called it the watercourse way. Water does not force. Water does not push through obstacles by sheer willpower. Water finds the path of least resistance, not because it is weak or lazy, but because it is in perfect alignment with what it is. It flows around rocks rather than trying to move them. It fills the lowest places rather than trying to occupy the heights. It takes the shape of whatever contains it without losing its essential nature, and in doing so, water, soft and yielding water, carves canyons through solid rock over time, not through force, but through the patient, consistent, effortless expression of its own nature. This is what Lao Tzu meant when he wrote that the soft overcomes the hard, not as a spiritual platitude, but as an observation about the nature of effective action in reality. Watts translated this insight for a Western mind shaped by centuries of a different metaphysics. The Western tradition, particularly in its modern secular form, operates on the assumption that the human being is a mind in a body in a world, and that the mind's job is to master first the body and then the world. Progress is understood as the expansion of control. Maturity is understood as the capacity for self. Success is understood as the achievement of outcomes through sustained effort and force of will. The entire cultural narrative is built on the image of the individual standing against the current of circumstance and, through sufficient effort, redirecting it. The hero is defined by their willingness to fight. The saint is defined by their discipline. The successful person is defined by their productivity. None of this is wrong. Exactly. Effort is real. Discipline produces results. Willpower does accomplish things. But something is missing from this picture. And what is missing is precisely what makes the having of all these accomplishments so unsatisfying in the end. What is missing is the recognition of the self that is supposedly doing all this achieving. What is missing is the honest investigation of who this one is that stands against the current of life and attempts to redirect it by force of will. Because when that investigation is actually conducted, what is found is not a solid, independent agent with intrinsic authority over events. What is found is a process, a movement, a pattern of consciousness that arises within life rather than standing apart from it. A wave that believes itself separate from the ocean it is made of and therefore spends all its energy trying to maintain the shape of its separateness against the very current that is its substance. This is not a metaphor. Watts was insistent about this, and it is important to hear him correctly. He was not saying that the separate self is an illusion that should be transcended through spiritual practice. He was saying that the separate self is a misconception that can be seen through simply by looking clearly at what is actually happening. The seeing is enough. The recognition is sufficient. You do not need to become something other than what you are. You need only to stop misidentifying what you are with the narrative the mind tells about itself. You are not the story of your life. You are not the sum of your decisions and your achievements and your failures and your relationships. You are not what you think about yourself, positively or negatively. These are all patterns within experience, appearances within consciousness, movements within the vast field of what is actually occurring. What you actually are is the field itself. Not a thing in the universe, but the universe expressing itself as this particular temporary form. Not a visitor in life, but life itself, appearing in this shape, for this duration, in this particular and unrepeatable configuration. When you know this, not as a concept, but as a lived recognition, the entire relationship to effort changes. Because effort made by life against life is absurd. Water does not push itself uphill through willpower. It is already in its right place. And so are you. The art of not forcing anything begins with the recognition that forcing is the aberration, not the norm. The norm is what happens in you and through you, and is you when the mind's compulsive interference is temporarily suspended. You have experienced this. Everyone has experienced this, usually in moments when self-consciousness drops away, unexpectedly, when absorption in an activity becomes so complete that the one who is supposedly doing the activity vanishes into the doing itself. Athletes call it flow. Musicians call it being in the zone. Meditators call it absorption. Mystics call it union. But Watts pointed out that these are not special states. They are what is always available when the additional and unnecessary burden of the self-watching itself is absent. They are the natural condition of a consciousness that is not divided against itself. The division occurs in thought. Specifically, it occurs in the kind of thought that takes itself to be separate from what it is thinking about. When you think about your life as if your life were an object that you, the subject, must manage and direct, you have introduced a split that was not there before. Before the thought of managing your life, you are simply living. After the thought, you are both living and managing. And the managing is in constant tension with the living because living never quite conforms to the management's specifications. Life does not ask for your approval before presenting its next moment. It does not check with your plans before delivering its surprises. It does not consult your preferences before requiring you to respond to what has arrived. And every moment of your resistance to what has arrived, every moment of wishing this moment were different from what it is a moment of suffering that was entirely self-generated. Watts was not saying that you should not plan. He was not saying that preferences are wrong, or that suffering is chosen in some simplistic way. He was pointing to the layer of resistance that operates beneath and alongside ordinary engagement with life. The layer that evaluates every experience not only on its own terms, but in terms of how it compares to what was wanted. That layer is the source of almost all psychological suffering, and it is entirely constructed by the belief in a separate self that stands in judgment of life, rather than recognizing itself as life's expression. Consider what happens when you truly love what you are doing. Not the performed enthusiasm of someone trying to be productive, but the genuine absorption of a person fully present in an activity that calls them completely. Time disappears. Self-consciousness disappears. The distinction between work and play disappears. The question of whether what is being done is difficult or easy becomes irrelevant, because the energy of the doing meets the requirement of the task without the friction of a self that is tracking its own effort and evaluating whether the return on investment is adequate. This is not a special experience. This is what experience is like when the artificial burden of self-management is temporarily lifted. The question Watts kept returning to is why this state should be temporary, why it should be reserved for moments of creative absorption or athletic peak performance or the early stages of love, why the rest of life should feel like wading through resistance. And the answer is always the same, because the rest of life is lived from the position of a self that believes it is separate from what it is living. And the solution is always the same, not the achievement of some extraordinary state of consciousness, but the simple, available, immediate recognition of what is actually the case. What is actually the case is this: The universe is approximately 14 billion years old. In that time, it has organized itself from formless energy into matter, from matter into life, from life into consciousness, from consciousness into the particular form of self-aware intelligence that is right now reading these words. This process was not directed from outside. It was not imposed on matter by a separate intelligence that decided how things should go. It unfolded from within, according to its own nature, following the grain of what it is, in the same way that water follows the grain of the landscape it moves through. Every form that has ever appeared in this universe, every galaxy and star and rock and cell and creature and thought, is this process doing what this process does. You are not in this process. You are not a product of this process in the sense of being something it manufactured and then released into independent existence. You are this process in the form it is currently taking, doing what it is currently doing. When a leaf falls from a tree, it does not fail to remain on the branch. It is the universe doing what the universe does in that place, at that time. When a child learns to walk and falls repeatedly before succeeding, the falling is not failure. It is the learning itself. The universe finding through this particular form what balance requires. When your life takes a turn you did not plan and did not want, this is not the universe making a mistake about your preferences. It is the universe moving through its next moment, as it always does, as it cannot help but do. And the only question is whether the form it is currently taking, which is you, will recognize itself as the movement or continue to experience the movement as something happening to it from outside. This recognition is what changes everything without changing anything. The circumstances remain. The challenges remain. The genuine difficulties of a human life. The illness and the loss and the confusion and the grief. These do not dissolve in the light of this understanding. What dissolves is the additional suffering of a self in resistance to these things. What dissolves is the sense of being a victim of life rather than a participant in it. What dissolves is the exhausting project of trying to force life into the shapes the mind has decided it should take, and the guilt and the anxiety and the shame that accumulate when life, as it invariably does, refuses to hold those shapes. Watts had a particular way of describing the relationship between humanity and the universe that cuts through the ordinary categories of subject and object, self and world, individual and cosmos. He said, "We do not come into this world, we come out of it. The way a wave comes out of the ocean, the way a fruit comes out of a tree, not as a separate entity that has been deposited here from some other place or dimension, but as a local expression of the whole, temporarily taking a particular form, inseparable from the process that produced it, continuous with the reality it appears within. The apple does not struggle to be an apple. It does not force its way into applehood. It does not manage its relationship to the tree from which it grows. It simply is what the tree is doing in that location, and this being is effortless, not because effort is absent from nature, but because the effort and the thing being effortful are not two separate things. There is no division between the apple's energy and the tree's energy. They are the same energy in different configurations. You and the universe have exactly this relationship. The energy that beats your heart is the same energy that moves the stars, not metaphorically, literally. The atoms in your body were forged in stellar explosions, billions of years before the Earth existed. The consciousness that reads these words is the same consciousness that has, over 14 billion years, organized itself into every form that has ever appeared in this universe. You are not a spectator of cosmic you are cosmic evolution, looking at itself through these particular eyes, at this particular moment, in this particular form that will last for this particular duration, and then dissolve back into the process that generated it. As everything does, as everything always has, when this is understood in the body, and not just in the head, when it becomes not a philosophical position you hold, but a felt recognition of what you actually are, the quality of effort changes entirely. Not because you stop making effort, but because the effort is no longer being made against something. It is no longer the effort of a separate self pushing against a resistant world. It becomes the effort of the universe moving through you toward what wants to happen next. The effort of water flowing downhill. The effort of a tree growing toward light. Effortful in the ordinary sense, requiring energy and attention and engagement, but without the grinding friction of a will imposing itself on reality from outside, from inside, which is where you actually are, which is the only place anything actually is. Effort and ease are not opposites. They are the same movement experienced from within, rather than observed from without. This applies to every domain of ordinary life, and this is where Watts was most practically useful, because he never allowed the teaching to remain at the level of cosmic metaphysics when it had immediate application to how a person actually lives. In relationships, forcing is the most reliable way to destroy what you are trying to preserve. Love that demands a particular form from the other person, that insists on specific behaviors and specific responses and specific kinds of presence, is not love in any meaningful sense. It is management. It is the attempt to convert another human being into a guaranteed source of the feelings you want to have, and it produces, reliably and without exception, the opposite of what it seeks. Because a person who is being managed withdraws. A person who is being controlled contracts. The love that is most capable of meeting you fully is the love that is given the freedom to meet you in the way that is natural to it, rather than the way you have specified in advance. This does not mean accepting mistreatment. It does not mean abandoning discernment about what is genuinely nourishing and what is genuinely harmful in your relationships. It means releasing the compulsive quality of the forcing, the anxious grip of a self that believes if it does not control outcomes, the outcomes will inevitably be bad. That belief is the problem, not the concern for what happens, which is natural and appropriate, but the desperate quality of the control, which is the ego's signature response to the terror of uncertainty. Inward, forcing produces a particular and recognizable quality of output. Work that is forced has a strained quality, a trying too hard quality of someone pushing from behind rather than being pulled from ahead. The work that most reliably displays excellence is work in which the maker has somehow gotten out of the way and allowed what wants to be made to make itself through them. Every artist knows this. Every writer knows the difference between a sentence that was forced into existence through sheer will and a sentence that arrived. The forced sentence works. It fulfills its function, but the sentence that arrives has a quality of inevitability, a quality of rightness that no amount of revision can manufacture from scratch. What is true of sentences is true of lives. A life forced into a predetermined shape by a will that has decided in advance what it should look like will work, but it will have the quality of the forced sentence rather than the quality of the arrived one. The path of least resistance is so consistently misunderstood that it is worth being very precise about what it means. It does not mean doing whatever is easiest in any given moment. It does not mean avoiding difficulty or discomfort or challenge. Water flowing downhill encounters enormous obstacles and navigates them all, not by avoiding them, but by finding the route through or around that is available, that is in alignment with gravity, that is consistent with the nature of water. The path of least resistance for a human being is not the path of least effort. It is the path of least opposition between what you are and what you are doing. When what you are doing is genuinely aligned with what you are, the effort required, however substantial, does not feel like resistance. It feels like moving in the direction you are already pointing. This alignment is not found through deliberate calculation. It is not the result of enough self-analysis or career counseling or personality testing. It is found through the same process by which water finds its path, by moving, by being willing to move and to follow the movement honestly, wherever it leads, rather than demanding that it lead to a predetermined destination. By trusting that what genuinely calls you, what you move toward naturally when the ego's agenda of managing outcomes is temporarily suspended, is a more reliable guide to your actual path than any plan the conscious mind can devise from the outside. Watts spent a great deal of time on the concept of trust, because trust is the practical form that the recognition of non-separation takes in ordinary life. When you genuinely understand that you are not separate from the universe, trust is not something you cultivate. It is simply what remains when the compulsive need to control is recognized as unnecessary. The universe has been running itself with extraordinary competence for 14 billion years. Your particular corner of it, your body and your life and your moment-to-moment experience has been running itself with equal competence for the entire duration of your existence, managed by a wisdom so total and so intricate that the conscious mind cannot begin to fathom it. The question is not whether that wisdom is trustworthy. It is clearly trustworthy. The question is why you do not trust it. And the answer is always the same. Because the ego, the separate self, the narrative consciousness that believes itself to be the manager, does not recognize this wisdom as its own. It experiences the body's intelligence as something happening to it rather than as something it is doing. It experiences the movements of life as external events rather than as the next moment of what it is. And from this position of apparent externality, everything feels like it needs to be managed. Everything feels potentially threatening, and the exhaustion of constant vigilance becomes the background condition of existence. The art of not forcing anything is therefore not a technique. It is not something you apply. It is the natural condition that remains when the misidentification with the separate managing self is seen through. It is what you are already, beneath the layer of compulsive effort. The river does not practice flowing. The tree does not practice growing. You do not need to practice being what you are. You need only to stop practicing being what you are not. But there is a particular difficulty here that Watts acknowledged with unusual honesty. The seeing through of the separate self cannot be forced either. This is the final paradox, and the one that trips up almost everyone who approaches this territory with genuine seriousness. You cannot force yourself into effortlessness. You cannot achieve non-doing through doing. You cannot will your way to the recognition that the will is not what you thought it was. Every attempt to make this recognition happen is another movement of the very ego, whose transparency is being sought. Every practice designed to dissolve the ego is another activity of the ego, another project of the self that believes it must manage even its own dissolution. And yet inquiry is not nothing. Honesty is not nothing. The willingness to look clearly at what is actually happening rather than accepting the mind's story about what is happening is not nothing. Watts was not teaching quietism. He was teaching see, the particular seeing that recognizes the difference between the map and the territory, between the story of your life and the life itself, between the thought I am separate from the universe and the actual, direct, immediately available reality of what you are. That seeing does not require effort in the usual sense, but it does require something. It requires the willingness to stop, even briefly, the constant forward momentum of a mind that is always managing the next moment, and to notice what is actually present in this one. What is actually present in this moment is extraordinary, not in the sense of unusual or dramatic, in the sense of the full reality of existence, making itself available directly, without mediation, without the need for the mind's story about it. The sensation of being alive, which is so constant and so familiar that it has become effectively invisible, is the most remarkable fact of existence. Something is happening. Existence is occurring. This particular configuration of matter and energy and consciousness is present, aware, capable of recognizing its own presence. The universe knows itself here, in you, right now. And this knowing does not require anything additional to be what it is. It does not need to be improved or expanded or deepened through effort. It is already complete. It is already sufficient. It is already, in every moment, the whole. The art of not forcing anything is the art of recognizing this completeness, not as a conclusion reached through reasoning, but as the living reality of this moment, available prior to reasoning, prior to effort, prior to the entire project of becoming something other than what is. When a moment of genuine ease arrives, when the usual tension drops away and something breathes that usually holds itself tight, that is not a special state being temporarily achieved. That is what always underlies the tension. That is what the tension is covering. That is the reality that the compulsive forcing of the separate self is perpetually obscuring through the sheer noise of its activity. Stop the noise, even briefly, not through a technique of quieting the mind. The noise cannot be stopped from within the noise, but through the simple act of noticing what is present beneath the noise, beneath the planning and the worrying and the managing and the effortful living of a life that believes it must be lived against the current rather than as the current. Beneath all of that is something that has never been disturbed, something that was present before the first thought you can remember and will be present after the last thought you will ever think. Something that is doing all of this, that is being all of this, that is the doing and the being themselves rather than a self that stands behind them and takes credit for them. Alan Watts called this the eternal now. Not eternity as a long time. Eternity as the timeless ground of all time. The present moment that does not pass. because passing is something that happens within it rather than to it. Every moment you have ever experienced was experienced now. Every moment you will ever experience will be experienced now. The past exists now as memory. The future exists now as anticipation. There is only ever now, and now is not a constraint. It is the only freedom there is, because what you are is what is happening now. Not what happened or what will happen. Now. This, the movement of breath, the weight of the body, the sound of whatever is present in this environment. The extraordinarily ordinary, perpetually available miracle of existence, making itself known through these senses. In this moment, force nothing. Trust the universe you are made of to do what it does, which is everything. Not passively, not without engagement, not without the full expression of your particular form of intelligence and care and creativity, but without the grinding friction of a separate self that believes it must manage from outside what can only be lived from within. The tree does not manage its growth. It grows. The river does not plan its course. It flows. And you, who are as much an expression of this same universe as the tree and the river, do not ultimately manage your life. You live italiano. The question is only whether you live it with the full recognition of what you are, moving with the current of what is, trusting the intelligence that has brought you this far with no help from your conscious effort at all, or whether you live it as a separate self fighting an exhausting and ultimately unwinnable war against the only reality there is. Nothing needs to be forced. Not because effort is wrong, not because challenges are not real, but because the one who believes it must force everything is itself a movement within the very life it believes it is managing from outside. You are not in charge of the universe. You are what the universe is doing. And what the universe is doing, here, now, in this form, is already exactly enough. It has always been exactly enough. It will always be exactly enough. The only question is whether this moment, which is all there ever is, will be met with the open hands of recognition or the clenched fists of resistance. Open your hands, not as a spiritual gesture, as the most practical act available to a human being who has finally understood what kind of thing they actually are, and what kind of universe they actually inhabit, and what kind of relationship between the two is not only possible, but already, without a single exception, in every moment of every life that has ever been lived. The kiss